A random encounter at a broadcasting facility. A shared interest and love of all things Marvel.
Excelsior!
A misinterpreted program title. And behold, a podcast is born.
Peter Melnick.
Podcaster and comic book enthusiast. And
Eddie Wilson!
Upstate New York radio announcer, still with an inordinate amount of catching up to do.
Peter, what are you doing? Eddie!
Here we go with a new episode of The Marvelists.
Hi, this is Bronze Age Marvel writer and artist Bob Layton, and you're listening to The Marvelists with Peter Melnick and Eddie Wilson.
Welcome, everyone, to The Marvelists, the Marvel Universe podcast. I'm Peter Melnick.
And I'm Eddie Wilson.
And joining us on the other end of the tin cannon string, we are joined with, Eddie, I want you to do the honors because I set up this interview because I'm like, you know what, Eddie, we've got some bucket list items on here. And the person joining us on this episode is someone that's very special to you.
It's a mutual bucket, perhaps. I mean, this is probably the first I'm putting a bucket list together. A veteran in the comic book industry and someone I've met on a couple of times, and I have 18 autographs, including maybe this 11 by 17 of Demon in a Bottle. It's writer and artist Bob Layton. Welcome and thank you.
Thank you, Peter and Eddie. Appreciate it. Great intro, guys. I'm blushing already.
Oh, well, sitting down would be good, too. So this thing off the bat is from November of 2014, just so you know how far back this kind of goes.
Okay.
Well, what's funny to me is over the years, one of the things about Eddie as a comic book aficionado, Eddie has a vast knowledge of comics. Sometimes he'll discount himself. He's like, oh, no, I don't. But then when I pull up like a piece of Iron Man art or the art of a character, 9 times out of 10, the man is pretty damn successful at identifying them. And the one that, I told you in our initial email correspondence is he can tell your art just by looking at it instantaneously. It is one of the coolest talents I've ever seen someone have in the realm of comics.
Well, it's cool. Most of us in the business, we other creators can tell each other's work pretty easy. So you just basically have inherited one of our normal superpowers.
It's innate, maybe. I don't know. And it's something like...
No, it's in Ed.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. It's just something, Bob, that certain things just stand out over time, over the years, because I'm collecting from the age of 10, and I'm in my 50s now. And, my heyday was really the 80s, and I know you were right there, whether it was Iron Man, Incredible Hulk, and the Hercules miniseries that I've got you to autograph and so on. And there's some things just stand out. I'm like, wait, I think I recognize that. And it's just a matter of, I think when we actually first started this podcast, where on the opening pages of whatever comic it was, well, particularly Marvel, you'd see this consistent list of names that were just there, and you're like, oh, yeah, I recognize that name. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head who wrote, who drew, who embellished, or anything like that, who finished. But, you're up there for me as one of my top guys. So.
You have to remember, too, that in let's say the Bronze Age when I started, right? Most people didn't care about who drew it or who. I mean, they didn't think that deeply into it. They were so into the characters and the stories, and then we kind of almost preferred it that way. The whole kind of star system is something that came about a little bit later, as they became higher collectibles and stuff. But when we were just selling on the newsstands, it was just people didn't know what they liked. They just knew they did. And they would come back for more. That sort of being able to discern the writer or the penciler or the inker, that kind of thing. It started around the time I got into the business, but before then it was just like I just love the X-Men. I don't know why, but it's like it's so good, and I can't wait for the next one. And in some ways, it should be that way. I mean, the story should always be before the creators, in a lot of ways, because that was our job, is to create entertainment.
And, when it comes to the realm of comics, obviously we all have our origin stories of how we got into, whether it being as a fan or a creator. With you, what was your origin story with getting in as a fan as well as a creator?
Well, it was kind of both. Mine is kind of a unique story. I started publishing fanzines back in the early 70s from my little apartment in Indiana. And in it started out as a comic catalog. I sold comics on the side, when I was doing my Joe jobs and stuff, right? And I ran into, by happenstance, I met Roger Stern, who also was the only other fan that lived in Indianapolis, apparently. And he was working at a radio station, so two of us got together, and slowly my little catalog turned into a fanzine, and he happened to know this Canadian artist that he'd been in contact with named John Byrne, who's cranking out some really interesting, fan art. And so we all kind of got together and started publishing fanzines. We did this little digest book called CPL, Contemporary Pictorial Literature. And that became almost like a who's who of comics now. I mean, our regular writers on it were like Steve Grant and Michael Uslan, the Batman producer, and Bob Hall came out of it, Don Mates, the painter. Go down the list. It's as long as your arm of people that wound up coming out of that thing. But what I would do every month, it was bi-monthly, I would send 25 copies up to D.C. and Marvel and Charlton at the time that was around, hoping somebody would look at it,
Yeah.
And what happened was one of the guys that worked at Charlton was a guy named Bill Pearson, who I knew through Don Newton, and he had showed my work to Wally Wood, and Wally Wood said, if this kid ever came out east, I could probably take him on as an assistant. So with $200 in my pocket and a Galaxy $500, Galaxy 500 station wagon, I drove to the East Coast. I had thrown a con in Indianapolis in '75, so I knew like Al Milgram and Walt Simonson and a few people. I crashed on their floors until I could find an apartment in Connecticut and go to work for Woody. So, and that's kind of how I got started, working as a background assistant to Wally Wood. And then once Woody retired, I went to work for Dick Giordano, who I also had known in Continuity Studios. I worked for Dickie up there. So I had two of the greatest mentors of all time, so I was very fortunate in that regard.
What was the biggest bit of advice that Wood gave you?
Well, this is the old classic line. Never draw anything you can trace. Never trace anything you can cut out and paste up.
And it holds.
Woody was quite a character. I mean, I came in at the as he was winding down his career. Unfortunately, his health was starting to fail. But we did publish a couple of fanzines together while I was, working as his assistant. We did the last issue of Wits End, issue 10, and Heroes Inc. #2. But his advice, he wasn't really one of those kind of guys that mentored you in a sense of trying to steer you toward life. It was just he was a great teacher, without a doubt. I mean, you think about it, Wally Wood really created what I would say is the 20th century inking for reproduction style. He up until that time, inking was really dependent on the ability of the penciler, and there was a lot of guys who just did one way or another, and there was like scratchy kind of inking, and but Woody kind of simplified and everything and boiled everything down to its common denominator, and really came up with, I think, with what became the modern style of inking for a long time. And definitely, most of the guys that were at Marvel started out imitating Wally Wood to some degree. Everybody did. I mean, in the industry, he was practically deified. But I had always been a big fan of Dick Giordano, so going to work for Dickie was that was the real learning experience. He mentored me my entire life, right up until he died. About 11 years ago, 12 years ago. We stayed close, but he guided me through my entire career. So he was an amazing man, no doubt about it. So I was doubly blessed to have two of the best in the business teach me.
And one thing I want to go back with Wally Wood, how many of those 22 panels did you see hanging around the studio?
Oh, God. Yeah. I mean, Woody, like I said, he was a character. But, those 22 panels is really, it's a true thing,
Yeah.
I mean, for the most part. I mean, that's what I mean. Breaking everything down to its common denominator. When you're starting out and you're struggling, Woody had a great way of just simplifying the process, that made it understandable, very easy. Dickie was definitely more of a finesse artist, I mean, he was, just a beautiful inker. He could embellisher. I won't say inker. He was an embellisher because he could take some pretty awful stuff and make it look great. The funniest thing about Woody that I learned was about inking Jack Kirby. As you guys know, you've probably seen from time to time, I'll find a Kirby pencil and I'll kind of update it and embellish it, right? What I always asked him about that because I remember some of the great stuff he did with Wally. In fact, the very first comic I ever read as a kid was Challengers of the Unknown. It was Jack Kirby and Wally Wood, and he would say blasphemous things like, Jack's a really good storyteller, but he can't really draw for shit. And I'm like, what? He says, yeah. He says, his actual drawing wasn't very good. So Woody would take a kneaded eraser, because Jack used a big number 2 pencil and kind of engraves everything into the page. He'd take a number 2 eraser and erase all the top pencil off, and he would just ink the bare bones layouts, and add real anatomy and everything to it. That's why it always looks so different when Wally Wood inked him, as opposed to anybody else.
And, when it comes to Wood as well, also with the 22 panels, I'm curious for yourself, which is your go-to panel out of all those 22 that you gravitate to the most and enjoy the most? Well,
it's been so long I can't even remember them now, but I'm big on the silhouette. Silhouette covers the multitude of sins, And
it adds a sense of, noir, just ominousness to it.
Yeah, exactly. But, he wasn't wrong.
Yeah, I was going to say intentional ambiguity.
Yeah, 100%.
Perhaps, yeah.
But, you're asking me, listen, Mr. Peabody, you're asking me to get a Wayback Machine and go back 50 years, okay? It's like, that's not the easiest thing to do.
Well, Bob,
so now where were you on?
Not to...
you know what I'm saying? It's that's a hell of a trip for me to do on the spot here on your podcast.
It's just such a cool thing to be able to...
Minutia, The interesting thing about Dickie, you're asking me what I learned, I always tell this story because it's really pivotal in my career in terms of reason why my career lasted, 45 years or something. I was on the train going into New York to Continuity Studios with Dickie. We both lived in Connecticut at the time. That's why it was, after I got done working for Woody and I worked with him, we went up there. And Dickie was sitting on the train, reading the New York Times or whatever, as he did, dressed in his suit or whatever, and little Bobby Layton was sitting next to him, and I'm reading a copy of The Avengers or something, right? And I remember Dickie reaches over and pulls it out of my hand and looks at me, lovingly, of course, but he looks at me and says, I need to know what your intentions are. And I looked at him puzzled, and I go, what do you mean? He goes, is this going to be your job or your hobby? He goes, because if it's going to be your hobby, I can't teach you. And if it's going to be your job, you're going to have to find some other form of entertainment. And I said, really? And he said, yeah. He goes, here's the thing. He goes, I have a lot of belief in you. He goes, but I've seen it happen. Those people who only get their inspiration from other comics never really develop into, somebody that makes a difference. He goes, it's so important that you derive your inspiration from outside sources. I thought about it, there on the ride home, and he was right. So I actually got rid of my comic book collection the next week. I know that's blasphemy for you guys out there, but and he was right. If you think about some of the seminal work that I've done over the years, and it's like I always drew my inspiration from outside sources, and as a result, you got Demon in a Bottle, which we're going to talk about later, and stuff like that, because this was all reflection of the things that were influencing me at the time. And Dickie knew that. He was a wise man. He also taught me that I should learn the business of comics as well as the art of it, because those people who survive are ones that understand the industry they work in. So even when I started working at Marvel on my own, I used to go up to the 11th floor all the time, which was the accounting floor, and talk to people and find out, well, how much does it cost? Why do we only get paid this? Who puts the staples in? It's like I became very curious to how the whole industry itself worked, which, kind of paid off later when I went over to start Valiant. But we won't talk about Valiant because this is the Marvelists.
I mean, we 100% can. I'm a big Valiant fanboy. So
yeah, no, but this is the Marvelists. We're talking about Marvel stuff, right?
We cover all ground.
But what I'm saying is, I also found out that Jim Galton, great guy, the president of the company, had a great portable bar in his office. And there would be many. I'd be the only freelancer that would go have cocktails after hours with Jim Galton in his office. But I remember that fondly.
Well, back again to the beginning, Bob. You can confirm, deny, or take the fifth on this. But some of the information I had was something to do with John Romita, desperately late for.
Prosecute me?
No,
take the fifth?
I'm giving you the option. That's all. In the Wayback Machine or whatever, but a very late issue of Iron Man, and then saying, yeah, I can meet that deadline, and it was an utter fabrication.
No, absolute true story.
Okay, so you BS'd your way into work. That was good.
And rather than go through the whole thing, because it takes 20 minutes, rather than eat up the whole podcast, just go look it up. In any interview I've done in the last couple of years has that story in it. So
beautiful.
Yeah, it's
okay.
absolutely true. Basically, I told John Romita that I could ink a comic in 3 days because he was under the gun. And since I knew everybody at Continuity at the time, and the guys at Continuity is like another who's who. We were all background artists, but it was like me, Terry Austin, Joe Rubenstein, Bob Wyacek, Bob McLeod. Okay, I mean, every inker that was worth his weight ever in the history of Marvel Comics used to work up there as an assistant. And I basically orchestrated for lack of a better term, a gangbang. And
wow, that is the first time that term has been used on this show, by the way.
Right, okay, but in the context of doing a comic. I was saying, and yeah, I turned it in, and pretty much without 3 days without sleep, pretty sure that I was never going to get work again. But as it turned out, John was impressed with the fact that I got it out, and it, as Dickie used to say, it reached a high level of mediocrity. And no, because that's another one of the wise things he said, because it used to really bug me that we just never have enough time to do what we're really capable of in comics.
Yeah.
He says, the thing about being a professional is that you strive to reach a high level of mediocrity in commercial art, which means on your worst day, when you have a headache, your back hurts, the dogs are barking, it's like the bills are due, it's like your girlfriend's pregnant, whatever the hell it is, right? You can still sit at the drawing board and crank out something that is acceptable, And he says that's really what you kind of have to strive for, is a high level of mediocrity, because you're never going to be able to take the time to sit down, especially in those days, where deadlines really mattered. Because I got news for you. In the Bronze Age, you miss a couple deadlines, you're done. Mm. You get a rep for missing deadlines, and nobody hires you. So they were incredibly strict back then. So it was like, yeah, he always said, yeah, try to achieve a high level of mediocrity, because it's commercial art. It's not, it's not fine art. You do the best you can, and a professional can do something pretty decent looking, even though it's not his best work. I remember Paul Renault was posted on Facebook a few months ago or whatever, that he was like really complaining that he never gets enough time to really do what he wants to do. And I sent him that story. I wrote him back, and I sent him that story about Dickie saying a high level of mediocrity, because it's commercial art. That's is what it is. And back then, especially, we just didn't have the time to have angst over every line that we put down.
Well, over here, at least with me in commercial radio, I and at least one of my coworkers kind of aspire to that same phrase of the high level of mediocrity. So I feel the sentiment.
Yeah, no, Dickie was a brilliant man, because, all through my life, I'd have these moments of personal crisis or whatever, where I would just I'm sitting there like, what am I doing? I mean, I'm not Jonas Salk. I'm not creating cure for polio or something. I'm doing stupid comic books. It's like, how's this doing anything? And then after we did Demon in a Bottle, and we got literally bags of mail from people, some of the most heart-wrenching things in the world, and you realize that Dickie says, you never know what you do, how this is going to affect someone's life. He goes, somebody did, made you want to do this.
Yep.
And he's like, it changed your life, right? I go, yeah, now you think about it, yeah. He goes, but you never know. A lot of times you don't get the reward of knowing how you affected somebody. But obviously, that Challenges the Unknown story by Wally Wood and Jack Kirby was so impactful to me that it made me want to devote my life to doing comics, to being a storyteller. And that's always how I always saw myself, as a storyteller, more than an artist or a writer per se. To me, it's always about story. I found out that it was just easier to get into comics as an artist than it was as a writer, because all the writers were covetous about what they did, and they could write a lot faster than we could draw. So I always thought of myself as a writer who dabbled in art instead of the other way around.
Well, then, Bob, just to put it back into perspective and to point of reference, the issue in question, the first Iron Man, was that number 91?
Well, I don't know what number it was, because I just don't think about them. I think that sounds good.
Okay.
Yeah, let's say you're right. Okay.
Good, because 116 was where the run started with you, and then of course we do get into.
When I came back from my tumultuous year at DC, and Iron Man was one of the 3 books they offered David and I as a team, and there was a book they were going to cancel. That's how they tried out new guys, was basically giving them books that were scheduled to be canceled and let them, because they figured out they couldn't ruin it. Because back then they would sign a contract for 12 issues with the Mafia, right, to distribute on newsstands and stuff like that. And it took 6 months to get returns back to know what sales were. And Iron Man, which is kind of crazy now, because back then cancellation range was like 90,000, which, would be a super hit, right, by today's standards. But so they offered us 3 books, and Iron Man was a book that I absolutely hated growing up. That's why I tell your listeners, it's really good sometimes to hang on to your hate, because I always thought that it was just terrible. It was never, I used to draw my own Iron Man comics, because I just thought they totally missed the mark, with the character and stuff, because he wasn't terribly powerful, and he was, I wanted to be Tony Stark. I thought that would be a viable fantasy to live out. I didn't really want to be Iron Man.
Oh, well, hey, the Playboy billionaire, why not? Sure.
Yeah, no, I'm saying that's an achievable fantasy, but I'm saying, why isn't this guy a rock star? Why isn't, when he walks down the street, why isn't he like Mick Jagger or something? You know what I mean?
He didn't want to pay an agent.
For Christ's sake, And he's got he's like the coolest guy on the planet. He should be the coolest guy on the planet. But they never really, like with most glyphs, they really treated him as a cipher. And one of my biggest pet peeves was, 1, it never looked like armor, and 2, it should be about Tony Stark, not about Iron Man. So Dave, who was a dyed-in-the-wool DC guy his whole life, had never really even read a Marvel comic, I just said, let's take Iron Man. Trust me. Okay, we're going, and I asked them, the editor, I said, can we change some stuff? And they're like, we don't care. We're going to cancel the thing, you know? And as they say, the rest is history. In 6 months, we had turned the book around in one of their top 10 books. So, and once you did that, that kind of made my career because, you know, once you do something like that, you kind of make your bones, as the mob says, right? And because nothing speaks better than sales. They love sales.
Bottom line, that's what it is. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, but the time we left, it was selling like 400,000 a month or something. You know, it went from 90,000 like 400. So it's like, which is insane when you think about it. But you know, to me, it was just. In fact, you know, Doom Quest was actually a story that I had come up with when I was 11 years old that I did on notebook paper. You know, because I was always such a big fan of King Arthur and everything. I wish I had kept that.
It's cool to see the evolution.
Can you imagine?
It's cool to see the evolution of, like, you know, somebody's childhood dream becoming a reality, you know?
I mentioned it that's what I'm saying. Never throw anything away, because I mentioned it to Dave during a plotting session, and he's kind of like, I really like that. And so it turned out to be one of the seminal stories that we did in our 2 runs on the book.
And, you know, we mentioned it earlier, you know, touched on it briefly, Demon in a Bottle, and you had mentioned about how the reaction that story has with so many people. And
to this day.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The unofficial spokesperson for sobriety in the comic industry.
A friend of the show, he kicked off his sobriety. The day he did it, he actually went to the local comic shop and bought a hardcover copy of Demon in a Bottle, and he had you to thank for that.
I have so many stories like that. I still get them. I still get. In fact, right on my drawing board right now, I can send you a picture of a guy who I'm doing a Demon in a Bottle sort of homage or whatever for him, his father struggled with alcoholism. But the letters that we got were just heart-wrenching. People say, I always thought my father is a villain, and then I realized he has a disease and stuff. And again, you know, it wasn't that we were trying to do anything controversial. We just wanted to get rid of the heart attack because it was ridiculous. They had heart transplants even back in the 70s, you know, and it just seemed like one of my pet peeves with him was that every single issue, it's like just when he's ready to beat Ultimo or beat the Mandarin, he would have a heart attack. Mm. And I don't know anyone who's had 50 heart attacks and lived other than Dick Cheney. You know, so it made no sense. You know, even in that time, for him to have the heart problem. And since we were creating this corporate world for Tony, this empire that he ruled like King Arthur, it made sense to give him some sort of internal weakness, you know. And that's kind of the evolution of that storyline. But the outpouring of emotion and letters from people, and as I said, I still get them to this day, and it's quite amazing. I mean, you know, it was a personal story for me. So, but what I was getting to was that we don't really innovate in comics so much as we are reflectors. We're mirrors of what's happening in society. You know, and at that time. That we did Demon in a Bottle, it was just when Betty Ford Clinic had opened up, and the first time people were talking openly about drug addiction and alcoholism, you know, and Demon in a Bottle was just a reflection of what was happening in society, being able to just talk about these things that have been swept under the rug for so long. We always reflect what's happening out in the world, right? More than anything. That's one of comics' jobs, is sort of to absorb what's happening in reality and inculcate it into our fiction.
Well, as a result, an offshoot perhaps, or an evolution of that whole storyline, we get things like, or people like James Rhodes, War Machine, Justin Hammer, and all the different Stark armors. Now, those came out of... I don't know, was there anything, maybe, let's say, I'm thinking maybe were you in the military and that kind of influenced some of the differences in the armor? Or?
No, I'll tell you why. This is an interesting story, all right? I presume we have time, right?
Yeah.
We haven't eaten up all our time yet. Yeah. Okay. I grew up in Indianapolis, which is the home of the Indy 500. So race cars and fast cars and stuff like that was all part of the mystique of that growing up in a very boring place of the world. So I used to draw cars a lot. I used to do Big Daddy Roth, weirdo cars and stuff like that, and so drawing, shiny metallic objects started at a very early age for me, right? But it also occurred to me, and this goes way back, okay? So I need Sherman and Mr. Peabody for this one, all right? As a kid, I remember reading this Batman annual. And in it was one of the dumbest stories I've ever read. It's like the many costumes of Batman. And he had a green costume so he could hide in trees, and he had a white costume so he could hide in snow. And it's like, and I just remember that saying, okay, that's really silly, all right? But in the case of Iron Man, because, there's a big difference between a spaceship and a submarine, There's a big difference between a stock car and a Formula One car. It's like technology. It's just too simple that you can build one suit that would do everything. And the idea of making him into the world's greatest engineer was also a matter that he would create armors that were specific to tasks. And that was something, I took that old Batman story and applied it to something where it would actually work. So that was the whole idea coming in, was I wanted to start creating armors for specific functions. That wasn't just the same thing. You just do everything. It's just too easy to have the Deus Ex Machina, and I didn't want that in Iron Man. I wanted the technology to have limitations and to be believable.
This show is brought to you by our Patreon. Go to patreon.com/The Marvelists. And on the $3 tier, you'll get access to episodes early and ad-free. The $5 tier gets you our 2 bonus shows. One, Fantastic Voyage, where we dissect and just talk about the 102 issues, one by one, although if it's a storyline, more than one at a time, of Stan Lee and Jack Kirby's amazing, incredible, spectacular, invincible, and fantastic run of the Fantastic Four, the world's greatest comic magazine. And 2, You Haven't Read That? A show dedicated to the comic books that I haven't read yet. Some Marvel, some DC, all fun. And on the $8 tier, pick a topic of your choosing, not a topping of your choice. Or perhaps you can be a guest on The Marvelists. Above all else, we thank you for your continued support.
And it's, when you look at that, it's funny because in the 1990s, the 2000s, the term that, eventually came about was toyetic. And you guys created toyetic armor for the character where you could do 15,000 action figures and they'd all be different and all have their own purposes, And
I don't get a sense for those.
What would you say, though, is your favorite of you? Oh, what's up?
No, I just said it's so frustrating because they've done such an enormous amount of merchandising, and I don't get a sense for any of that.
What would you say, though, out of all of the armors, is your favorite one that you've worked on?
Oh, God.
And what is the silliest one?
Well, I don't think any of them were silly because I wouldn't have done them if they were silly, if I thought they were silly. But, no, I was fond of the space armor just because, from a practical standpoint, you could tell there was a huge difference because, one, I got rid of the mouthpiece because it's just another hole you can get sucked out of in case of explosive compression. Nothing would be worse than Tony Stark being liquefied through his mouthpiece, right?
It'd be worse for Reed Richards if he was in the costume. He literally gets sucked out of the entire thing.
Yeah, no, but the idea was that it was bulkier because he was going to be weightless, so it didn't matter. I mean, I designed it, engineered it to be specific for space travel, right? So it altered the look considerably. People went nuts when it was the first time we did it.
Was that the first time that the color scheme also changed to the silver and crimson, or
was that
the first time that the color scheme of the armor changed to silver and crimson?
That was Silver Centurion, but that also created a fervor as well. Yeah. That was done. Well, I wasn't working on the book at the time. They just asked me to redesign it because the sales were starting to sag again. And Mark Gruenwald came to me and asked me to redesign the armor. And one of the biggest problems with Iron Man was the fact that the coloring was a 16. It was a 16 color palette, right? Very limited in what you could do. And one of the first things I learned is that negative space always pops. So, in this case, negative space being black or white. So it occurred to me, if we're going to make a change in the armor, let's make the first major color change in the armor since, the original, and make it white. So no matter what bad coloring it was behind it, it would still pop.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that was really kind of the origin of that. It was really a way to combat the limited color palette at the time.
Space armor fashion sense like that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, I was, the Silver Centurion armor has always been such a controversial thing because, I was against it with Mark because because the rules of technology are always that things get more streamlined as they get more evolved, and he wanted to make it bigger and bulkier, but, it was the first offensive armor, and most of Tony Stark's weaponry and everything was of the defensive nature, but he really wanted to create something that was more of an offensive weapon. I acquiesced to it, but, God, the fans, there are like two whole, groups of people, out there, Iron Man fans who absolutely hate it and then absolutely love it, right? I'm bullied for both of them. It's like, that's the whole point, right? If it's something I did 30 years ago and they're still arguing about it, that's a good thing, right?
Absolutely. Yep.
Yep.
Now, when it came to the X series, the X Factor comic, were you an original X-Men fan? And coming into that title, how was that for you?
Well, I don't know if you realize this, that at one point I was supposed to be the regular inker on the X-Men back in the early 100s of the book. Dave Cockrum and I were really close friends. He wasn't necessarily a fan of Frank Chiaramonte's inking, and he had convinced them to bring me on board. But it was a bi-monthly book at that time, and also, all he had done is team books. At DC, I had done All-Star Comics, and the first book I did at Marvel was The Champions, and now here's another team book, which none of the A-list guys want to do team books because there's just too many characters running around, right? And then there's Dave with all his incredibly creative costumes, which are also difficult to do, right? And it's like, and struggling because the pay was terrible back then. And the book was only bi-monthly. I did one issue of it as the new inker. I think it was issue 105. And then I signed a contract with DC for a year and went over there. Mm-hmm. So I dropped the X-Men, which was really funny because that would have meant that then, had I not done that, there would never be a John Byrne and Terry Austin, right? So, interestingly enough.
Well, you mentioned that, and with the X-Men title at the time, every single, creator, Cockrum had his favorites in there, like a Nightcrawler. Byrne had, he gravitated towards Wolverine. Were there any on the X-Men roster at the time that you would have gravitated towards, that you had an interest?
That was my problem. When I got the book one day, right, and I started working on it, I'm like, the only person I recognized was Cyclops. I said, these aren't really the X-Men to me, because I grew up with, Iceman and the Angel and Marvel Girl and the Beast, right? And that was kind of like the thing. When I got the opportunity to create X Factor, my thought was, I wanted to bring those original characters back. They've been floating around like in the Champions and stuff. I got to do a couple of them in the Champions and things like that. But I'm saying, why not bring back the original group? And of course, to my utter chagrin to this day, that was probably politically one of the worst things I could have ever done. It was a huge success, don't get me wrong. But it was the first X-Men book not done by the X department, right, the editorial department. and they made my life a living hell. They rejected every plot that I put out. They would just, they editorially just sat on me, until it took the joy out of doing it, And as much as I loved working with guys and everything, I did 5 issues of it in the annual, and I said, these guys are just making my life miserable. And the other rule that I always had was, when it stops being fun, don't do it, because the pay wasn't great. So you might as well have a good time. And I always had a blast doing Iron Man. Let's face it, I was practically doing it for free anyway. So, but they just took the joy out of it. I mean, after these constant editorial battles just to get a story done, I'm just like, yeah, I'm done. And and then I got drafted to go do Secret Wars. I am the only person in that war who was actually drafted.
Well, any highlights or things you want to pass on when you got to do some work on? I know it was just a handful of issues of Amazing Spider-Man, or even working on those Hercules miniseries.
Oh well, the Herc was. Remember what I told you earlier, that I was a writer who dabbled in art. Mm-hmm. My intention all along was to work and be a writer foremost. Story was everything to me. Mm-hmm. That's why every issue of Iron Man was co-plotted by me. If I didn't have a hand in the story, I didn't want to do it. So with Herc, that's why I left Iron Man to do Hercules, because when they announced that they were going to do the first limited series ever in the history of Marvel, I'm like, well, I want to get in on that, because this is a chance for me to write and draw my own stuff. And so I was absolutely sure that they were going to reject the idea, because the idea of a 5,000-year-old god basically drinking his way through the galaxy and whoring his way through the galaxy was something I didn't think that they would go for, but sure enough, they did.
Sounds like a great time.
Oh no, well, the other thing was too, I just came off, doing 20-something grim issues of Iron Man, right? And all the books. I mean, it was the death of Jean Grey and Daredevil, the whole death of Elektra. And the Marvel Universe was, we were obviously redefining the Marvel Universe for another generation, but it had gotten really dark. And I wanted to do something just stupid. I was very influenced by Douglas Adams, and
yes.
Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And the idea of mixing that with Marvel mythology just kind of tickled me. And, it was during the time of Star Wars, so it wasn't a bad idea anyway, right? So, Star Wars had just come out like a year before or whatever, so when I started working on it. So it was kind of all kind of came together pretty well. I was always imagining that I would just do this thing and have some fun with it and move on, but it turned out to be a huge success. It spawned, it spawned another miniseries. I think it was the only one that ever had two second series, and then a graphic novel, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, it was kind of like my response to the grim Marvel universe was to do something incredibly stupid. It's kind of the Bluto effect, right? It calls for an absolutely stupid and futile gesture on someone's part, and I was just the guy to do it.
And a good time was had by all. I think that Hercules' character is one that that's what we've seen in Marvel comics at least, and he's in
there's
his
still
element.
a rumor floating around that the cinematic universe is going to visit Hercules at some point. It's like I hope I stay alive long enough for that. That would be a blast.
Who's your dream casting for the character?
Oh, I don't care. I never think about that. I don't like actors, generally speaking.
For some
you got to remember, I spent 12 years in Hollywood. I am not starstruck.
Mm-hmm.
Actors are for the most part very difficult people.
I will say, though, I would love to have seen back in the 1990s a Hercules movie starring the actor who played Al Borland on Home Improvement. He would have been perfect. He's got the beard and he's got the hair. He's good to go.
None of that really matters. When you're transferring, and believe me, you're talking to somebody who's had a lot of his work transferred to film and television. It's like that transition has to be made in this way that your mother understands. I always joke to people that my mom never understood what I did for a living until she saw the first Iron Man film. And, because my mom would never sit down and read a comic book. She'd never do that. She used to say, "Yeah, my son, he's a doodler." I doodled for a living, and it's like, of course, I got her respect once I bought her a house. But once during the Valiant days, I got a respect from that. But it wasn't her thing. But watching a movie is very different. But when you're evolving a character for a mass market like Marvel was doing with the films, it's so important to do stuff that your mother would understand, because you find out that the general public doesn't have the what do you call it, the suspension of disbelief that the average comic person does. So things have to be adapted in a certain way. That's why I've never gotten too hung up with the fact that the costume isn't like it is in the comics and blah, blah, blah. I think the first Iron Man movie is so true to the spirit of what I did. I mean, I know Hawk Ostby personally, and he's a wonderful guy, great writer, and he was absolutely true to the spirit of what we did. That's why I think that movie still is one of the best Marvel movies ever done. Plus, David Maisel, the founder of Marvel Studios, is like one of my biggest fans in the whole world. I mean, his office is like a Bob Lee art museum.
And by the way, you had mentioned earlier that you had gotten drafted into the Secret War.
Yeah, well, I was on contract at the time, and since I didn't have a regular book, basically it's like, guess what you're doing? We need to fill in because Mike Zeck needs a break. So I got drafted.
And what was it like working on that one?
I understood why Mike needed a break. Another team book, man. Tedious. It is so hard when you have, that many characters running around. And Jim, bless his heart, is not the easiest guy to work with. Because Jim will decide, I can do this better, and he will throw out whole pages and ask you to be redone with no time on the clock. So it was done, but it was hard. But I only drew 2 issues of it, and I did 4 covers. But they still, I signed millions of those things over the years. It's crazy, how popular Secret Wars still is with so many people. Plus, they called on me to design the toys for Mattel too. So that was interesting because I got to go to Mattel's little secret workshop and all that kind of stuff, and that was a fun experience.
Were there any of the toys that were not, that did not make it past the sketch phase?
I can't recall. Mm-hmm. Sorry, Mr. Peabody.
Oh. Well, one thing as well, by the way, you mentioned with the whole, a team book can be a bit of a hassle because you're juggling so many different characters. What are some of the little tips and tricks you would do while working on those titles to make it a little bit more, a much more expedited experience?
I don't think there's any tricks to it. I think you just have to knuckle down and do it. You can't like erase characters or anything. You just have to learn how to put X amount of characters into one panel. It's not that easy. You just learn how to stack them, man. Like any director, how can I get 5 people into the shot? All of them in action or whatever. It's not always the case, I'm saying where you have large group shots, that you have to deal with. But it was again, that was such a blur because, like I said, I was just pulled out of my reality and jumped into that as to fill in, and that was crazy. But strangely enough, that Hulk cover I did, issue 4, that thing was voted as one of the top 100 covers of all time.
That's the one where he's holding up the mountain, right?
Yeah,
I love that one.
It was voted. They did a poll, I guess, on CBR or whatever years ago, and I actually had 5 covers in the top 100 of all time, but that was one of the top ones there. And it was so funny because at the time, when I drew it the first time, it was too large. And I remember Jim said, it doesn't really give. Yeah, we can see the figures and stuff, but it doesn't give you the feeling that he's holding up a mountain. He goes, pull way back. And I go, really? I go, you serious? You want me to just draw a cover that's nothing but rocks? He goes, yeah. So I redid it, and sure enough, it worked.
Wow.
So
you said there were 5 covers that were in the top 100 of yours?
Yeah, yeah.
What were the other ones?
Well, I just remember it was Demon in a Bottle.
Mm-hmm.
There was that one. Spider-Man Moon Knight, believe it or not, was the Amazing Spider-Man. I think it was 220 or something.
With the coffin?
Yeah, coffins for Spider-Man. And I'm trying to think the other two. I think the other two was just something I inked, but still.
I remember when I got first back into comics around 2011, 2012, I went to a local comic shop and he sold me a stack of 1980s Spider-Man's comics. And, in there was sitting that cover because I was on a massive Moon Knight kick as well because, I would dig through the dollar bins and find the 80s Moon Knight, the Sienkiewicz run. And I grabbed those and I saw that cover and there's so much. Like it's one of those kind of covers. You look at it and it grabs you immediately because you're seeing that. You're like, wait, why is the character in the coffin? What's going on? I have to read that. And it's a great way of grabbing the attention.
Well, that was always what's what I miss about covers now because they all comic covers now look like Aurora model kits.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, there's no story. And I always loved the fact that when I was growing up, the cover tried to hook me. It was the first line of the story. I mean, when you see the cover of the Demon in a Bottle, tell me you could resist cracking that open to find out what the hell's going on.
Yep, exactly.
I mean, I always loved that. I loved, that it was the first line of your novel, and it's like, it made you want to read it or whatever. And I mean, by any standards, it wasn't even one of my best covers. But again, it's one of those things that resonate with people. And you never know. You just never know what's going to resonate with people. You just do your job to the best of your ability, and and I hope that you're entertaining and you reach a high level of mediocrity, and people decide.
Nowadays, Bob, what do we find you up to, working on, or looking forward to doing?
Since the pandemic, I was in Dubai in the Middle East, working there in the film industry, but when when the pandemic happened, I flew back here. So I've been locked in my apartment for 2 years, which has not been fun. But actually, we are going back into production on my first feature film, a movie called The Helix. I have my own production company called Box Monkey Pictures. And we've just made it. We're in the process of making a deal. I can't say anything now, but it's with one of the streaming services. So it's going to be a large budget for a streaming service. Okay, and it's the first in what would be a contained universe. It is science fiction. It's not. It's adult science fiction. Like Arrival or one of those things. It's not like superhero stuff. Okay. But it was a very intense story that I wrote years ago when I was working in Hollywood as a spec script. When I was working for Edward James Olmos, actually. The rights reverted back to me, so I'm along with some partners, I'm making this movie myself. We're going to be filming in Sweden, hopefully by the spring. We're just now getting to the contract stages on that. So that keeps me kind of busy. During the pandemic, I was just going back to doing commissions and doing commission art, which was great fun because I wanted to spend the time to improve my craft because one of the things I did at Valiant was, I used to teach, new colorists how to watercolor, right? Although I'd never had done it myself. It's one of those things where, it's like being a music teacher but never having actually played in an orchestra.
Yeah.
I understood color. I just never actually sat down and did it. So my daughter, who was a Valiant alum, she was a veteran of Valiant Comics. She used to color Shadow Man over Bob Hall over there. I had my daughter teach me how to watercolor. So I've actually, in the last year, been offering doing commissions in full color. So I spent the time actually teaching myself something.
I think also of some recent memory, and maybe not very recent, but I think I'd seen some Facebook postings of other works that maybe were alternate versions or the unfinished versions, just the pencilized of notably Iron Man, if not others.
Well, I post every day. I mean, I try to I don't put my personal stuff up, like what I had for lunch. I don't have pictures of sandwiches or my dog or anything up there. I keep my family and girlfriends and everything else out of my Facebook life. My social media life is pretty much just entertainment. It's commercial stuff. The commissions I've done, the experiments I've done, things that people have never seen before. That I find a file of some old page that never got printed or something like that, and so I try to it's kind of like an alternate history of my career on my social media pages. But a lot of times I'm just posting the stuff I'm doing right now, because like I said, just sitting, since there's not much I can do. I won't do any cons until they get the pandemic under control. So, I was doing a lot of personal appearances and stuff. So, so now I'm going to get back to work on the film. So I'll probably be over in Sweden for in the spring for at least 3-4 months while we're doing production and post-production on it. As the writer, I have to be there every day. So that's exciting. Finally, 11 years of work trying to get this thing made. We're finally going to get it made.
So also, Bob, by the way, you said you don't post it on your Facebook or anything, but what did you have for lunch today?
Actually, I had pho. Well, the reason why, because when you guys wrote me earlier today and said 5:30, I said, well, I couldn't be 5:30 because it was my granddaughter's birthday, and every year we have this annual mall crawl where she gets 90 minutes, no spending limit, but there's caveats to it, but she gets to run from store to store and buy whatever she wants to buy. And she's a bit of a fashionista. She's 14 now.
Uh-oh.
So the mall crawl went long today, but since we were there, they had a pho place, so I had pho for lunch, which, as you know, is a Vietnamese noodle soup.
Well, I do now. Okay.
Yes.
Wow. Okay. Well, happy birthday to her.
All right. Well, Madeline, she's the joy of my life, without a doubt. She's the only one that takes after me. It's so strange, and drives her mother and father nuts. She's an incredible artist. I mean, it's better. I mean, I look at her stuff and I'm like jealous at 11. I mean, at 14 years old, she's better than I was at 14. She has potential to be an incredible artist. She's very manga-esque, though. She's into that sort of thing because the era we live in.
It's funny because a lot of the manga stuff is getting heavily big into the mainstream. It's been doing that year by year. Well,
you go to Tokyo. I was in Tokyo 3 years ago, and it was it's incredible. You go to the comic stores there, and I mean it's just the sheer volume of comics being created over there is just staggering.
And it's funny. Like, are there any certain kinds that you've read yourself?
No, I haven't. I'm not a fan of the genre per se. I don't look at comics as entertainment. That's why after Dickie told me to get rid of my comic book collection, I became a football fanatic. I decided I was going to get into sports. So football has been my hobby, so this is an obvious great weekend for me.
I wonder why.
Well, let's face it. Are you guys football fans at all?
A bit.
Last weekend was some of the greatest football ever played. I mean, every single game was not boring. sometimes they're incredibly lopsided or whatever. But this has been a great year for playoffs. So it's like, unfortunately, like I said, growing up in Indiana before the Colts got there, my first football experience was watching Super Bowl III with Joe Namath. So I decided to be a Jets fan, which was probably the first sports mistake I ever made in my life, because it's been downhill since then.
I mean,
but
myself,
you stay loyal to your team, right?
Myself, I'm not really much of a football person, although I do love making fun of Tom Brady just to bust my best friend's balls.
Well, yeah, I don't like Tom Brady either, so that's fine. But I think he's going to retire anyway. So,
it was a heck of a
New
place.
Yorker most of my life, you automatically hate all Boston teams. That's just how the way it goes. So having contempt for the Patriots is just something that's inbred in most of us that live in the city.
There are three certainties in life: death, taxes, and the Patriots just being terrible.
Yeah, I know. You just get sick of seeing them in the Super Bowl. You just want somebody else. Yes.
I was going to add that was just a great place for you to start, was with Namath and the Super Bowl III. And on the other side of the coin, my wife, well, through association, my wife being the fan, she's the New York Giants.
Oh, okay. Well, they've had some good years too, but they're right up there with the Jets now.
I hear you.
I mean, New York, being a New York football team, just the suckage is just part of the game now.
Mm-hmm.
But no, what I'm saying is that's I had to turn my hobby somewhere, and so I just stick to football. I don't do basketball or hockey or any other thing because I don't want to be one of those guys that just spend their entire life watching television. Okay, so I limited it. Plus, when my mom was still alive, my mom was a country girl. Grew up in the Depression, the youngest of 13 children, on a tobacco farm in Kentucky. So my mom, she only had a third grade education. She worked like a dog to raise 5 of us by herself, her whole life. And I always had trouble communicating with her. She just did not understand what I did for a living and, why I would live in New York City. I've done these things. But what I did find out was that we shared a common enthusiasm for football. My mom loved football, college and pros. And so through the years, through the decades, Saturdays and Sundays, my mom would be on the phone with me all weekend. We would just, because we would just call, sometimes we watch the same game and with the phone on, that kind of thing like that. When I went to visit her, we would just spend the whole weekend watching games and stuff. But that's how I bonded with her. It was the only way. I mean, she passed away last year, but at 95, so she.
Oh, bless her.
Yeah, she had a pretty decent life, but that's why watching football is a little sad for me now because I kind of expect mom to call at any minute, But it was also a way for me to bond with her. So that was part of my enthusiasm for the game, and it replaced my collecting comics.
And the thing is, though, in regards to being a creator, it's good to be able to just get out of being stuck in one bubble, as opposed to like, hey, it's comics. You want to be able to.
No, as I told you guys, I spent 12 years in Hollywood. I left. I went out to work on the first Iron Man movie and stayed. And it was I went out in 2008 to work on Iron Man 1, and I decided to stay. And I worked out there doing a variety of things for, like you said, until 2016. Then I moved back here to be with my grandchildren. I realized I was missing their child. Plus, at that point, I was telecommuting more than anything anyway, so I realized 6 months had gone by, and I was actually physically attending a meeting anymore. So living in L.A., which is, by the way, not recommended, it was, especially if you're a New Yorker, it is the antithesis of New York.
Would you say Randy Newman was full of shit?
Yeah, he can have it. I mean, I miss my friends and I miss the food. Otherwise, you can take L.A. and I have no use for it whatsoever. I mean, I lived 12 miles from the LAX. I used to give myself 3 hours to get to the airport.
Oof.
Yeah, it's just insane, But the time I spent transferring what I had done from comics to film was invaluable to me. Again, and just like with Dick Giordano, Ed almost became a mentor to me and taught me so much. I went to work with him and his son Michael in their production company after Iron Man 2, and it was like Eddie taught me so much about how to translate from doing comics to films, because it's not. People think it's almost the same thing, but still pictures. It's nothing to be further from the truth. It's much more complicated than that. And Eddie taught me economy. He taught me nuance, things like that you really can't do in a comic. But the difference is too, in a comic I can tell the history of Galactus in 22 pages, and in a movie it would take 4 hours. The time becomes a factor. Which time there is no time in comics. Time to move from panel to panel, and how much time skips from panel to panel is really depending on the storyteller. But in film, it's a different matter entirely.
Well, with that, Bob, going out to Hollywood to work on the first Iron Man movie, did you go into it with any thought of, all right, let's see how long this takes to do, or could I see myself doing this more than just for this film, if you recall?
Oh, yeah. No, the point is, listen, after Valiant, I'm, where like I said, I was a co-owner of a company, right? I mean, there were no more mountains for me to climb in comics. People keep asking, why don't you go back to comics? Well, one, the pay is terrible. Mm-hmm. Two, there's no more royalties anymore like they used to be. And three, it's like, what can I do that I haven't already done? I have over 6,500 comic book credits to my name. 6,500.
I'm letting that sink in, yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's from the comic book database, all right? And it doesn't even have Cheezosaurus Rex in there, okay? they're missing a few things, I guess. So, I mean, I've owned 2 comic book companies. There's really nothing left for me to do that I haven't already done. So to me, Hollywood was the next step, right? Making characters who move and talk and don't wear their underwear on the outside. It's like, it was, for me, a logical progression. Comics are a game for the young, not to quote Captain Kirk or to paraphrase him. It really is. It's a game for younger men, and back when money didn't matter to me so much, and, I had all the time in the world, comics was a hell of a lot of fun. But, as an adult looking at it, it's like, it's not a good business model. It really isn't, I mean, I needed to move on. I needed something that was more of a challenge. And Hollywood provided me an enormous challenge. I worked as a script doctor. I did production design. I did character design. I did a ton of different things, learned a whole bunch. And more than anything, I learned the language and customs of working in Hollywood, because it has a language and socialization all its own. Basically you learn to speak bullshit fluently. Yeah. So it's like, first thing I did when I got out there after the first year was I bought an erasable calendar, because nobody can ever keep their appointments. It's an amazing place.
I would think that with overtime and stuff, and once they get to become a more regular thing, that you will go back to doing appearances, conventions, and perhaps, besides getting some kind of compensation, you'll see a little bit of the you'll get some gratification maybe from the fans and some reciprocation of the.
Oh no, my fans have been great. I mean, they've stuck with me over 45 years. I have no gripes about my fans whatsoever, and they're still quite present on social media and everything. The Comic Cons, if I go out to Comic Cons in the future, it'll be to promote my film or films, because hopefully this is the first in a series of projects that I'm going to do with this particular Swedish production company that'll be on streaming services that I can't mention and blah 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 blah. But yeah, I go to cons to promote that stuff or whatever. I mean, I love the cons. I love meeting the fans and all that sort of thing. It's just I don't want them giving me like fatal, disease or whatever. I'm a little prone to respiratory infections because, I mean, con crud, I would get it every year. I mean, I'd do 15, 17 cons a year, and I guarantee you I'd come back from at least a couple of them sicker than a dog, right? So,
my least favorite thing about conventions, is the con crud as well as the lighter wallet.
Well, yeah, and not only that, but I'm doing them globally. I'm all over the world doing these things, and I got sick in France one year. I mean, where I almost died. It was like crazy. So it's like now with almost a guarantee that you're going to get sick. Because I'm not a spring chicken anymore either. I can't find any con that's worth me risking my life over, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm going to wait till the pandemic kind of dies down a little more before I ever do these again. Just because, again, it's just not worth it, But thank goodness, like you said, I have social media and a ton of followers there, and we communicate every day. So, I don't know. I don't know what we did before cell phones and social media, right?
So now, before we wrap this up, by the way, you just mentioned social media. First off, Bob, thank you for doing the show today.
Oh, my pleasure. And
how can people get a hold of you on social media?
Well, I am on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Ignore the names because they were put there. When I first went to Hollywood, I was being represented by WME, and they gave me an agent. Basically to write my social media stuff, but I couldn't stand it because the guy couldn't write. But so I'm on Instagram as comic legend Bob Layton. Oh my God, which I would never have called myself, right? I am I think Bob Layton 7 on Facebook, and I'm probably the only Bob. When you look. Bob Layton. If you go to my website, boblayton.com, there are links to all of it there, too, as well. You can also go to Box Monkey Pictures, my production company's website, boxmonkeypictures.com or boblayton.com, either one. But I'm always out there.
Well, Bob, it's not like the title doesn't fit of legend. I mean, somebody's got to do it.
I didn't write it, though. I wouldn't call myself that. Okay?
No, I get it, but Reed Richards did, as immodest as it may sound. What the hell?
Well, but I'm not that kind of guy. I'm not,
I do want to state for the record, by the way, I'm currently looking through your Instagram. I've followed you for a while, and I love that semi-recent Iron Man variant you made with the background that looks like the arc reactor. That is incredible.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. The blank cover? Yeah. That's what I'm saying. Now, I don't have to worry about a high level of mediocrity. That's the other great thing about doing commissions since I've been locked up since the pandemic, because I don't have to. I can take my time, and everybody comments. Not everybody, but a lot of people comment. It's like, your work's gotten so much better over the last few years, and so you're finally seeing what I'm capable of doing when I don't have to rush things. And I'm enjoying it. Now I'm drawing for the pure joy of it, and the money, of course. But I'm saying because I say no to a lot of them too. A lot of times they come up with like really incredibly stupid things, and I'll say, no, I don't want to do that. But the fact that I can just do stuff just for the sheer joy of it and take my time is very gratifying. So now you're kind of seeing me being me, So, that's fun. And again, in these golden years of my life, I should be having fun, right?
That's exactly right, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it goes without saying, on behalf of the both of us, we greatly appreciate all you've done throughout all the works and all the information you've shared with us. And, we are humbled, in a sense.
Well, again, thank you, guys. It's actually been a lot of fun. It went by very, very quickly. But so have me back sometime. We'll do it again.
Absolutely.
We got that on tape. Okay, cool.
All right, guys. Thank you so much.
Now, also before we go, be sure to follow us on social media. I'm on Twitter and Instagram at Peter Melnick. Eddie, you are?
On Instagram at Eddie9193. And, of course, the one that started it all, Facebook. Look for Eddie Wilson, the guy in the sunglasses. And there I am.
And also, collectively, we are on Twitter and Instagram at The Marvelists. For The Marvelists, I'm Peter Melnick.
I'm Bob Layton.
And I'm Eddie Wilson. Excelsior!